The Old Testament is a must for every true Christian. It amazes me how often people question the wisdom of studying the Old Testament. Surely we should understand that we are no longer under the old law, but under the new. But this does not discount the usefulness of that old law. Others might complain that the Old Testament is boring and long. There are even those who appear to be pious because of how they emphasize that there is so much to learn in the New Testament that we should really learn it first, since it is what we are under. All of these reasons appear good on the surface, but not one of them respects the true value and need of studying the Old Testament as God has told us to do. Paul, writing to the church at Rome, said, "For whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we, through patience and comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope." The great apostle said this immediately after quoting Psalm 69 verse 9. Therefore, there are many principles that we should learn from Paul's use of the Old Testament. Paul wrote about and recognized that the old law had been nailed to the cross, but he said that there was still a place for it. In fact, he shows us that by understanding it, we can gain greater insight into our hope. The Old Testament teaches many of the same principles as the New, and we can learn from it by applying these principles. It is filled with exciting stories of men and women who risked their lives and gave up physical pleasures in order to please God. The stories of Joshua leading the Israelites into battle are filled with action and adventure, as are those of David. It tells us of the beautiful love stories of Jacob and Rachel and Ruth and Boaz. The Bible is not dull by any means. The beauty of Hebrew poetry throughout the Psalms is obvious, and the prophets discuss the nature of God. The New Testament is filled with quotations and references to the Old Testament. How are we to truly understand these references in context if we do not know the background of that quotation or account? How can we appreciate the impact of Hebrews 11 if we know nothing of what these men and women have done? When Paul uses Abraham as a great example of faith, it is assumed that we should know what he has done, and that Paul was simply pointing out what caused him to do it. The great flood shows that God will be just and yet provide a way to escape his wrath. The saving action of Noah and his family from that terrible destruction is then equated by the Apostle Peter to the saving action of baptism today. The Old Testament was written for our learning. It gives us the background that we must have if we are to understand the teachings of Christ and his inspired apostles and prophets. A failure to study the Old Testament shows that one really has no desire to understand the New. The Bible is one book, a beautiful unfolding of the scheme of redemption. Brethren, let us not cast aside anything that God has written, but let us use it and learn from it that we might be more pleasing to God. Like and subscribe to this channel for more tidbits.